Welcome to Does It Matter by Brainy Ballers, where we dissect the game with cutting-edge analytics to give you the upper hand. We analyze everything from hand sizes to average depth of targets to uncover hidden trends that no one else sees. Say goodbye to guesswork and hello to data-driven domination. Because here at Brainy Ballers, we don't just watch the game, we understand it. So get ready, it's podcast time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're really digging into some fascinating source material you shared.
That's right. It's an analysis from Brainy Ballers.
And it asks a pretty fundamental question, one anyone interested in football probably thinks about. Does a wide receiver's height really, significantly impact how they perform in the NFL?
Yeah, it feels like it should, doesn't it? You always picture that tall receiver making the big catch.
Yeah.
Seems intuitive.
Totally. Taller equals better reach, right?
Exactly. But data often tells a different story than our gut feelings. So our mission here is to unpack what Brainy Ballers actually found. We want to look at their numbers and figure out what they really say about height and success. What are the key takeaways for you, the listener?
All right, let's get into it. So Brainy Ballers looked at years of data on NFL wide receivers, trying to see if the top guys, the best performers, tended to be certain heights, and they actually identified what they call an optimal range.
They did. They pinpointed this specific range between 5'11" and 6'3" and 1/8 inches.
Okay, quite specific.
Yeah, very specific. And to see if that range actually meant something, they looked back, way back to 2003.
And compared to what?
They compared how often players in that height range finished in the top 10 for fantasy wide receivers each year versus how often they finished in the bottom 10.
Ah, okay. So comparing the best outcomes to the worst based on height, what did that show?
Well, the numbers were interesting. They found that 65.7%, nearly two-thirds of the top 10 finishers, fell within that optimal height range.
65.7%, okay. And the bottom finishers?
For the bottom 10 guys, only 52.4% were in that same 5'11" to 6'3", 18 bracket.
So that's a difference of what, about 13%?
14.3%, yep. It suggests that, being in that height window makes it more likely you'll end up among the top fantasy producers compared to the bottom ones.
More likely, but not a guarantee, obviously.
Not at all. But the frequency is definitely higher for the top group. It's a noticeable pattern.
Okay, so that frequency data is one piece. It suggests something's going on with that height range, and this is where it gets a bit tricky.
Right.
Brainy Ballers also looked directly at the correlation between height and fantasy points. They used a statistical thing called the Pearson value.
Yeah, the Pearson correlation coefficient, it basically measures how strongly two things move together in a straight line.
And what did that show for height and points?
Well, this is the surprising part.
Do you want to start dominating your drafts? At BrainyBallers.com, we've researched every metric under the sun for you to find which ones are best linked to fantasy points. You can access hundreds of metrics to sharpen your scouting ability so you know which metrics matter and which are just noise. Stop guessing on which thresholds to look for within each metric. Big numbers can be misleading or irrelevant. Our Ultimate Athlete Blueprints reveal essential scouting metrics, their importance and benchmarks within each metric that help predict a player's probability of being a success or bust. Elevate your scouting ability with Brainy Ballers' Ultimate Athlete Blueprints today. Click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
The Pearson value came back at 0.067.
0.067. That sounds incredibly low.
It means there's almost no linear relationship between height alone and fantasy points scored.
Wait a second. Help me square that. How can receivers in that height range show up in the top 10 more often, but then the direct correlation says height itself barely matters for points? That feels contradictory.
It does seem that way at first glance.
Yeah.
It highlights that correlation isn't the whole picture, and looking at height in isolation is misleading. Think about it this way. The source mentions that something like running back draft capital has a Pearson value of negative 0.234 with fantasy points. That's a much stronger signal.
So a much clearer relationship than height's 0.067.
Right. What that tiny correlation for height tells us is that, well, yes, top receivers often fall into that height range. The height itself probably isn't the direct cause of their high scoring.
So it's not just being tall.
No. It might be that height works well with other things, speed, agility, route running, that aren't captured by just looking at height alone. Or maybe it's just a common trait among guys who also happen to have other, more important traits.
Okay, that makes more sense. So height isn't the magic bullet predictor on its own,
Definitely not.
but it's not totally irrelevant either based on that frequency data. How does it fit into their bigger picture?
Exactly. It's not useless, it's just weak on its own.
So it's like height is just one ingredient in a complex recipe.
That's a perfect analogy. One pinch of salt doesn't tell you much about the cake, but it's part of the overall formula.
Got it. So for you listening, what's the bottom line? If you're evaluating players just looking at height.
Probably not a good idea based on this. That weak correlation confirms your gut feeling about needing a tall receiver isn't enough on its own.
But don't completely ignore it either.
Right. The analysis does show height is a characteristic found more often in top guys, and it does play a role within a more sophisticated multi-factor model, like the SPS.
Okay, quick recap then. An optimal height range exists where top receivers appear more frequently.
Check. 5'11" to 6'3", 18.
Its real value, according to Brainy Ballers, is as one small input among many in a bigger predictive system.
Precisely. And, think about this for a moment. This whole analysis is a great example of something bigger.
How so?
It shows how you can take multiple factors, even ones like height that seem weak or have tiny correlations on their own, and when you combine them intelligently in a model,
They can create something powerful.
exactly, they can create a much more predictive tool than any single piece alone. It makes you wonder, where else does that principle apply? Where else could combining nuanced data, even seemingly weak signals, reveal hidden patterns or insights?
That's a really interesting thought to leave people with, looking beyond the obvious single metric.
Yeah, it's all about the bigger picture.
Great stuff. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into your source material.